Well, why don't we, it's already 8:37, so I think Derry and Daryl had a conversation earlier this morning that is some important news for us to hear. And then the council has been pretty straightforward in what their thoughts were based on what we sent to them. And so I thought maybe, Daryl, if you want to, we'll obviously won't officially call the meeting to order, but I think we need to just go ahead and have the dialogue we're going to have. And then I heard the council say they logged on and listened to the call. So I'm assuming this is recorded and they can, or did they look at the minutes or?
No, it is recorded.
Okay.
It's recorded through, it's not streamed live, but it is recorded, and we are loading it on YouTube after the fact so people can see the meetings that we're doing during COVID, the ones that are virtual.
Okay. So I would say that even though we're not calling ourselves to order formally with a quorum, that we'll go ahead and discuss the items that we have to talk about. Brenda, does that violate any kind of a Open Meetings Act rule or anything like that?
No, sir, you just can't take any action. So I did hear from Matt. He is out of town and he was hoping to be able to call in, but his connection isn't working. So he will not be able to join us.
So even though we're not in official session, let's go ahead, Daryl, if you don't mind, and discuss
You bet.
what we have, and then we'll talk about what the council thought about our recommendation, and maybe we'll pick up another few members along the way. So Daryl, I'm sorry I interrupted.
So we had actually a very stimulating conversation with our elected officials Tuesday at 5:30 related to the first draft of the Economic Development Advisory Board's recommended program guidelines for the $5 million ballot question. We got to share with the EDAB board that you'll remember in our very first conversation on the subject, Board Member Holmes highlighted the federal and state money, or the federal money through the states, that we know will be in circulation, and that we should do our darndest to access all of those dollars first. And that seemed to resonate very well with everybody on the board. We should not further burden local taxpayers if their federal tax dollars are accessible. That effort was followed through on by Commissioner Stacy in Cleveland County when they hired their consultant group, Widow Bryant, to help navigate those waters. And everybody on staff began to scan and survey all of the news feeds that they all monitor. And Sarah Kaplan on our side has been watching specifically on program information coming out through the state on the $1.5 billion CARES Act allocation given to the governor's office to distribute. We had made several phone calls with our contacts through FEMA, through the state, when we were submitting our reimbursement request for COVID-19 expenses incurred. So personal protective equipment and time off for the federal paid leave requirement for COVID-19, 10 days for everybody, when we were locked down initially. We've submitted, I think the last number was in total about 1.7 million in reimbursements. And we found last week an updated document on frequently asked questions and program eligibility. And that most recent release on program eligibility and frequently asked questions talked about a small business recovery loan program available with CARES Act money through the state. Well, I'd made contact with the governor's chief of staff. We contacted Congressman Cole's office and Senator Inhofe's office and said, this is exactly the conversation we're looking for. We're having it locally because we can't figure out how to access these dollars through the state. And in fact, when we made the call to the state originally about how do we get money and can we do this, we were told those are ineligible expenses. And then we watched OKC and Tulsa put together small business recovery loan programs through their direct allocation of CARES Act. So we were a little unhappy that they were getting to spend the same money the way they wanted, but we were told we could not. Just this week, and Commissioner Stacy confirmed it for us this morning, a communication went out from the governor's office through the Oklahoma Municipal League that said the state has only been able to distribute about 5% of the $1.5 billion they received from the feds, and they've got about 2 months to get the rest of the money out the door. So they're following a distribution formula which would wind up putting a little over $9 million in the city of Norman's hands, from which a small business recovery loan program could be administered. That was fresh information late yesterday, confirmed this morning. So now we're scrambling to plow through the Oklahoma Municipal League to say, okay, you guys sent this communication. What is the mechanism to access it? And when do we anticipate having those dollars available to us? So what that could mean, based on the original conversation with EDAB, is we could be able to establish a loan program through CARES Act money. And our goal would be not to issue these bonds if voter approved until all of the federal dollars have been fully subscribed. And then council could consider the need and say yes or no to the issuance of the local $5 million bond money. So a great revelation for us. We're sorry it's so late in the game to have the conversation. The loan program we're establishing is still completely valid. And we would need to have these loan parameters even to administer the CARES Act money from the state. So not a wasted step on our part. It actually, put us in a really good place to put those dollars out in the street faster, we hope. So had to share that with you. We will share that with the council this morning. We don't want any voter to think that we had knowledge that we were going to get state money and not told them so they would vote yes. We want to be as transparent as possible. And our ability to share that direct OML communication with the public, we think it's necessary. May have negative impacts on voter approval for this ballot question, but we feel if we're not transparent and we don't share that information, it would not look good for us. So we plan on making that information available to everyone. The changes council discussed as we walked our way through the 2-page document, I'm glad we gave them, I think, a very complete concept, and they had some minor tweaks and some wordsmithing, and they asked for a chart that Chairman Thompson described as a matrix and then a double matrix, the mechanism by which scoring for underwriting would be tabulated, evaluated in an objective manner. And handful of words, and then they made some recommendations on dollar adjustments for the maximum loan amounts in the first 2 programs. Excuse me. And I think that was under a $5 million model. What they didn't want to have happen is 12 larger entities make 12 loan applications and gobble up $5 million and 40 little companies got nothing. So council talked about, for the first revolving loan program, instead of a $250,000 limit, maybe they felt more comfortable with $50,000 to $100,000. That conversation evolved into perhaps there is a round 1 application period where the bar is set lower so that the smaller entities, maybe with fewer resources to keep them sustained, would always have a bite at the apple. And after the round 1 application period was closed, then round 2, and that dollar amount would go back up to the $250,000. That was that council concept. Other than the matrix to demonstrate how the scoring works and the dollar amount changes, Brenda and Catherine, if you can help us highlight the balance of council's thoughts in the document.
I think you've captured the largest threshold. They also talked about adding, making available these monies to businesses or programs that will now be impacted or having to get more involved, I guess, due to COVID, related to child care or tutoring, things like that with the distance learning. I think the way she worded it was businesses with needs as a result of COVID. But they specifically talked about those that were related to school and children and possibly even, I think they mentioned something about feeding or lunch or something like that, but.
Daycare centers and tutoring startups.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There was mention of startups, whereas what we've looked at are people who were in business on a certain date in March. I think they're looking at maybe making some of these funds available for startups who are a result of COVID-19.
Ed, you had your.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, wasn't there also a comment during the meeting by one of the council members regarding entities that were either contemplating bankruptcy or had been in bankruptcy?
I think that comment had to do with eligibility. And so I think Councilwoman Bierman wanted to make sure that if they had filed bankruptcy in the past, that they wouldn't have a credit demerit for having had credit issues in the past. But I think they did understand that if they were currently in bankruptcy and the funds that they would receive through the program could somehow be attached by creditors or otherwise, spirited away, then they understood that it would be a problem if the applicant was currently in some sort of a legal issue, challenge, bankruptcy, other kinds of claims. And so I think it had more to do with the fact that they didn't want to preclude somebody who'd filed bankruptcy in the past or something like that.
Okay, thanks.
And I would like to add also that a comment that council made, we the committee had talked about eligibility based on the kind of corporate structure, whether they were not for profit or a 501c6. And so that was not used in the end. And there were some organizations that, for example, a 501c6 is not a lobbying organization, but they can have a certain small amount of their activities be issue-based support. And so the council, it sounded to me like their preference would be that eligible applicants would have no lobbying component in their business. And so that was a little bit different than we had talked about. We were thinking that the 501c6 organizations were organizations that were left out of the PPP process. And so I think the committee had earlier thought that we could include 501c6s in this funding, that we could pick up some organizations that had fallen through the cracks and some others, but the council didn't sound like that was something they were interested in doing.
That would be correct. And they also talked about under the technical assistance or training programs, under that category of funding, doing some type of partnership, possibly with Moore Norman Technology Center, where maybe even individuals who were displaced from work and are needing to learn something new could get like a $1,000 grant or something if we partnered with Moore Norman Technology. That's about as much as they said about that. There wasn't a lot of discussion, just a way to, instead of it being a business, it would be towards that individual for revocation of skills. And then the last thing that they spent a few minutes talking about was under our priority considerations, that last bullet point about the highest priority will be given to entities that demonstrate the greatest negative financial impact. There was a lot of pause about using the highest priority. They were concerned that you could still have met maybe all of the other four bullet points listed there, and then but demonstrated a greater financial need and get bumped out. I mean, I don't know that they really understood exactly what the committee was talking about when they talked about that, but they were concerned that it would be given to the applicant that would place them ahead of all the other applicants that may have met all this other criteria. So I don't really know how if you want to change that, or how you think that might be reworded, or what.
I think that fell into the double matrix conversation. Daryl and I were texting on the side that you could have one score that would come out of those other elements, and then the higher ranking applicants in that score then would be separately measured against the impact score. And so
Okay.
that way
Yeah,
you wouldn't
correct.
have one particular element overweigh or overtake the other scores. That shouldn't be too hard to do. I've seen that a few times before in funding programs.
Anthony texted, he may have texted you, Brenda, as well. He's having trouble unmuting, but he wanted me to mention their discussion about certain groups that utilize funds for lobbying efforts, and they wanted to exclude those groups. You know, a lot of nonprofits do lobby for mental health funding and things like that. Nonprofits that we don't necessarily want to exclude. And I don't think that's at all what council was thinking about, but that could be read more broadly and unnecessarily exclude folks who really do need assistance.
And Anthony, I have unmuted you if you want to add anything to that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, no, that was really all I wanted to talk about. When the council was having that discussion, I was concerned about, they wanted to, the original language had been, that businesses couldn't have lobbying as their main business concern, and that was okay. But they wanted to take out even the word partially. And that was a concern, because I knew that a lot of the target nonprofit organizations like Mary Abbott House or the Visit Norman do some lobbying, but that's not their main business. And we didn't want to preclude because of that.
So Anthony, I think that's absolutely appropriate. Next Tuesday night, in a study session environment, we'll review the final draft. That'll be on the August 25th council meeting for adoption. And I think if we explained that, because we said primary function of lobbying, but yeah, even the Norman Arts Council lobbies for public art. But I don't believe council wants them to be precluded. So we'll need to clarify that with council with these examples at hand. And I think council will recognize we can, further define what we mean by, primary lobbying as their business activity.
Very good.
Then the last comment I'll add would be basically, and I think this was already a given, I think the committee's been focused on this from the beginning, but they want to make sure that the criteria is written such that the focus is on those who haven't received access to funds elsewhere first and foremost before others are considered.
Right. So is it safe to say, maybe this is Brenda, Daryl, that we as a committee generally accept I don't know how this mechanically works, but we generally accept the thoughts of council. I mean, they're the final say, but we do disagree that this no lobbying whatsoever. Is there a mechanism or a process where the committee would say that, thank you for the input, but our recommendation about, organizations that are not lobbying organizations, but do have a certain element of advocacy for their own special interest, if you will. How do we formally do that, or is that just a dialogue from the city manager? How do you see
We
that?
can, what I would recommend and what other committees have done in the past is even when they've been able to take formal action, which you all can't do today, but it's not unusual for the committee to still have consensus and then a letter be prepared for the chair to sign that gets forwarded to council with this draft report that kind of summarizes. We recognize all of these concerns of council. We still have concern with this, the lobbying, that there are going to be some that fall through the cracks, and it could be handled that way.
And we might trade the word lobbying for advocacy, because I think if you're a, you know, I think that's what we're talking about is the Arts Council, the, you know, local organizations that advocate for their own well-being, for their, you know, for the special mission that these different not-for-profit organizations have. If we switch the word from lobbying to advocacy, maybe that would make a difference.
And maybe it's a requirement that these funds aren't used for those efforts.
That's good. Well said. Thank you,
Yeah.
Kathy. They segregate these funds in some way. That's good.
And that honestly isn't unusual for any of our other grant programs and things here at the city. You typically have to show what you're using it for when you apply for it, and it can only be for that purpose. So I think that could work the same way.
Okay, well said. Maybe it's some wrap-up comments, maybe from Derry and Daryl. The $9 million that would be coming in from the state through the city, is that money able to flow through this system that would be built around this program, or is it going to have a different kind of restrictions or requirements on it? Do we know yet?
Commissioner, have you got any insight? All we were able to see was that business recovery loan programs are eligible expenses. If it's made as a loan to be repaid, the repayment goes back. It'll wind up in the U.S. Treasury eventually. We think we would collect it and it would go to the state, and the state winds up sending it back to the feds, which may want us to think more about grants because it'd be a bigger advantage and a bigger boost to the local economy if those small businesses didn't have to repay it. So just a thought, and that, you know, could be fine-tuned even as we're able to access those dollars and it comes our way. But I don't know if the commissioner has any better insight on any of the limitations on the $9 million we anticipate.
So I would say that in my discussions with our consultants, that is exactly the type of program that these dollars can be used for. And we have had those initial discussions. We looked at doing it more of a regional perspective, but if Norman gets these dollars directly allocated, they should be able to use them for that. Moore, who I've been in close contact with through this whole incident, is actually meeting with our consultant today to put together the use of their dollars they received in that allocation, a little over $5 million. It would be my suggestion that you guys do the same thing. And again, it doesn't have to be the consultant we're using. I can give you names of several that we researched and looked at before we settled on this one. But those dollars that you pay for that consultant can be reimbursed as well through the CARES Act. So that's helpful that you can reimburse what you use for the consultant. And I think that would make people happier, but they can navigate these waters. They've already put these programs together and they can assist you in getting those dollars out the door.
Great. Thank you, Derry. One of the things, this is thinking out loud, so maybe might not be so good, but if we are able to have access to the county's consultant and Moore is going to consult with the same people, not that we need to mirror what other communities are doing, but if there is a consistent style, if you will, but in the area, businesses, you know, that are located in Moore or located in Norman or in the county, If there was some programmatical similarities, then that might help. That might help businesses or applicants maybe have a better general grasp of what's going on, even though there might be some unique factors in each community. And one of the things that, as Daryl, you and Derry were talking, I have in mind the, what to say about the $5 million, the community taxes itself, to put a $5 million stimulus plan. And if there's $9 million from the state, and that money is really more to be granted out. Daryl, you mentioned that if we got some of it back in repayment, then that we wouldn't get to keep it. The city wouldn't get to keep it. That would go back to its source.
Correct.
And so if we looked at this $5 million, where if it's 9 plus 5, and we say the $9 million, it all goes through the same process, the same application process. We don't build something separate. But the $9 million piece is grants, one-way money out. And then the $5 million, if I'm a voter, and repayable money, or money that would be expected to revolve, then we could create a $5 million revolving fund and then say, okay, well, voters, your $5 million could be perpetual. That would be the plan for those funds. And then the $9 million would be funds that were going to be granted. That's funding that will go through a granting process. And that way, if I'm a voter and I say, well, gosh, you got $9 million, why do I need to do anything? We could have a comment to offer to a voter to say, well, but here's the difference in that the $9 million and the $5 million in that we would establish that as much as we could for revolving fund. And that's just a thought to offer.
Yep, then we'd be prepared for the next pandemic or weather event.
Well, I want to point out some language that council had added to this proposition. It says proceeds of these bonds may be expended, but to the extent federal funding is awarded to the city for similar economic and community development purposes, such federal funding will offset the authorization set forth herein.
That changes everything.
So offsetting the authorization means if we collected 9 and council chose to use anything at 5 million or more for this same purpose, that means we do not have the authority to issue those bonds. Is that correct, Madam Attorney?
Yes, that's my understanding. And I think that was the idea, is because we're asking so much of the voters that, and we didn't know where the federal funding stood, that if we ended up getting that funding, then we would not ask the voters to raise their property taxes for that purpose.
That is great voter protection.
So let's just back up a step and make sure we got this. So really, we're done. I mean, the committee, if the $5 million, the wording in that you just read seems to me to be pretty clear on its face that this issue is now no longer, I want to say moot, because that's probably not the right word, but is that right, Catherine? I mean, it's.
Yeah, I mean,
well,
I still think that, like Daryl said earlier, the policy that you all are talking about, maybe, the policy we use for the $9 million.
Okay.
It's just the source of funding may be different.
So now, just curious, so do we tell the council and the community that we're pulling the $5 million question off the ballot? How does that work?
We can't pull it off the ballot. It's already been out on absentee ballots. We just wouldn't issue bonds. If it's authorized, we wouldn't issue the bonds.
Okay. And then if for some reason that it passed, so it had got a majority yes vote, then it just nothing happens. So the funding never occurs.
Yeah.
Because I do think there's an effort to vote yes on all 4 questions. And so I'd want to be careful to say, well, it's okay to vote no on this one, and could cause some confusion among the voters, that we'd want to say it's still a good idea to go vote yes on all of them. But with the federal funds coming in, we wouldn't sell bonds. But there may be those in the community that might be not trusting of the cities. And we want to make sure that we make that clear, as of which you already have. It's already in the ordinance. But
Yeah, if we don't have the federal funds in hand before August 25th, then I think we still need to ask the voters to vote yes. you know?
And
They
Mr.
are
Chairman, if I
protected.
may,
What?
Derry, go ahead.
I wanted to speak to what the city manager say, and I think even the rules from the Treasury Department are changing daily, so please understand that. And I would say this is my interpretation so far, speaking with our consultants, but I don't know that it's out of the question to create some type of a revolving fund with those dollars. And that's been our discussion with them. So I'm not saying that you're not right, Daryl, but I think that's something that should be explored further, because that did not seem to be the issue in our initial discussions. So I just want to clarify that before we make a decision based on that information.
Well, Commissioner, I appreciate that. My communication through state officials was that we could not revolve it. And that, well, first of all, we didn't even have access to it 2 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden we're supposed to get $9 million. So I agree. Your information is probably much more current than mine. And it does make me wonder, we saw this happen most recently when the university had to write a refund check because they took transportation dollars to build the bus barn for public transit. When they got out of the public transit business, the Department of Transportation said, you have to give us $3 million back. The Department of Transportation lost sight of the money because it just wound up in the Treasury. And that may not be the intent of the federal government with this COVID CARES Act money. They see it as stimulus, and paying it back isn't necessarily in line with that view. So we absolutely need to continue to explore that. And if somebody will put it in writing for us, either through the Capitol or through Washington, D.C., as soon as we see it in writing, we're going to keep that. And we're just going to rely on that writing that says we could revolve it. That would be huge for the city of Norman. Huge.
So to your point, the federal guidelines from the Treasury Department are not exactly the guidelines that the state is using. They have been much more restrictive from the beginning, and within the last few weeks, they have loosened up those restrictions because they've seen the difficulty in getting these dollars out the door, particularly in the time frame that they've been given. So I think as long as we continue to work with the state, but most importantly, we follow the federal Treasury guidelines, that's what's most important.
So
Thank you.
can, yeah, and Brenda hello, Chris, we're glad you joined. Thank you. Do we have a quorum now?
You do have a quorum now.
Or okay, thank you, everybody. But I want to follow on Derry's comment about the consultant. So Daryl, or can we recommend or have you take action to connect with the widow, whatever?
Bryant?
Yeah, Widow Bryant, and how would it work for the city to access that same consultant? So we're all using the same advisory service. Is that appropriate?
I think I can access them for an amount not to exceed $25,000 on my authority. And my guess is any expenses incurred in accessing these dollars would be an allowable expense from those proceeds. So I think we could access them without impacting the city's general fund at all. That is my understanding.
Okay. So is there a reason to not follow Derry's suggestion and access the county's consultant for this similar kind of money?
I would say if between now and tomorrow at 5 o'clock, if I can't get a direct answer from a state official saying we're going to wire you the money on this date, that'd be worth a phone call, because they've only got about 8 more weeks to get all of the money out of the state capital into the hands of the cities and counties. And it's a whole bunch of money. And I don't know if they're even prepared or capable to move that much money out to the cities and counties. So time is definitely of the essence. And they've just been so slow in getting the information out to us. that anything that they don't distribute, they're supposed to return to the treasury. And heaven forbid we let these dollars escape Oklahoma and go back to Washington, D.C. It would be tragedy.
So Daryl, this is again when I think we may have conflicting information that's coming out even from the state, because as I understand it, you and the county and all the cities are going to have the money specifically allocated, but they're going to continue to follow the same process that you submit for reimbursement through the state at the beginning of each month. And so whatever dollars are not submitted for by the end of the year, and let's all hope we can work something out on the federal side in order to get an extension, because that's what we're really pushing for. But it's not that they're going to just directly allocate those dollars like they did for Oklahoma County, Tulsa County, and the city of Oklahoma City. It's still going to be a reimbursement, but those dollars are going to be allocated and you draw from your amount. Does that make sense?
It does. It frightens me because I'm not convinced, honestly, in 8 weeks, we could actually do all the loans and all the grants and all that kind of stuff. And we definitely want something hard in writing that says if we distribute $9 million of general fund money, I know I'm going to get my check back in a timely fashion. We've had FEMA reimbursements that sometimes took 18 months to get. And I can't spend that money out of the general fund and wait 18 months to get it back. I need to get it back like that month.
So to the very point, number one, and I'm assuming you guys have as well, we've already received reimbursement for what we have submitted to this point. And so they have the dollars there, and we've already gotten checks back on the 2 tranches of that, as it were. The process that we're also continuing to try and get in place with the state is they do a pre-approval process so that we submit those. They say, yes, that's pre-approved, and you expend those dollars and we will pay you back. So they said that they're in the process of putting that together as well, which I think would alleviate a lot of your concerns.
I think so too. That would be a big advantage for us. They do it the hard way, darn it. They could hold all of us individually accountable, and we get a single audit done every single year on all of the federal dollars that flow through the city of Norman and every other city in the United States of America. And these are program dollars that the federal government could easily audit as part of the single audit process. That machine already exists. They don't even need a new bureaucracy to audit our adherence to these federal guidelines. So honest to goodness, the easiest thing in the world, they just hand us the money, let us do it, let us be accountable directly to the federal government and keep the state out of the middle of it. It'd be easier and much more efficient.
I agree, but what I was told at the very beginning was that these dollars are going directly to the state if you're not a municipality or county that's over 500,000. And so the state was the one that was going to be on the hook for the audit, and whatever money. That's why it was so important that they approved, based on the federal treasury guidelines, whatever the municipalities and counties spent the money on, because the audit would come back on them.
Is this the conversation that Daryl and we could have with the consultant, this Widow Bryant?
Yes.
Absolutely. Our EDAB program parameters, I think, are still valid. In loan criteria, they refer to as small business. They did not define small business. I think the EDAB definition of small business is going to be valid. I don't know if we submit our parameters to the state for their approval. Maybe not a bad idea.
I think absolutely that's what you would do. And you would have Widow Bryant put that together into a project that you would submit to the state to get their approval on it. And then you would draw down from your dollars based on that.
If I'm going to give the folks at Widow Bryant a jingle and ask them to send me over what could be, 1 or 2 page engagement letter, especially if they're able to confirm in that engagement letter that their fee is a reimbursable expense to help access these dollars. That would be ginormous, and I get that executed immediately. Once Catherine tells me it's okay.
Now we have a quorum. Could this committee vote to authorize you to do that in our opinion? Does that help?
Catherine? I mean, you can certainly take action to make a recommendation that he do that. I don't know that this committee has the authority to authorize him to do that.
Yeah, but you could make a recommendation that you do that.
Okay. Would one of our, I see Chris's lips moving, but she's on mute, so I think she's making the motion, right?
I am. I'm sorry.
Okay, good. Motion by Chris and a second by
Second.
by Ed to recommend or to the extent that we have authority for Daryl to reach out to Widow Bryant, the consultant that the county is using to gather information that we've discussed to help make these decisions. Any other questions or comments about that? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wave if you need to. Any opposed to that motion? Carries unanimously. There you go, Daryl.
Thank you. That call will happen today.
Thank you very much. And Derry, thank you for opening the door for that consultant to work with the city. We appreciate that a lot.
Absolutely. And Daryl, I can send you the contact information if you'd like.
Yep, if you can text it to me, if you got it on your phone, that'll be super speedy.
That'd be great. And Chris, thanks for joining. And you may or may not have been on when we had this conversation, but the council generally accepted the recommendations from our committee with some specific changes. And Brenda and Daryl went over those. And I believe that we generally concur with the changes in the language that that the council suggested. However, the council felt like in their conversations that they did not want the funds to go to any organization that does any kind of advocacy. And so that would preclude a number of organizations that were listed earlier, everything from Food and Shelter to Women's Resource Center that do engage in advocacy, the Arts Council. And so I think our committee, we wanted to respond to that we generally agree with their observations. However, as it relates to restricting or not allowing applicants to be considered eligible if they engage in any kind of advocacy, that we wanted to have them reconsider that. Does that sound correct, Daryl and Brenda?
Yes.
Okay. So having said all that, I'd like to get 2 things done business-wise. I'd like to be able to accept the recommendations from the council to our presentation with the noted difference of the advocacy issue and get that vote done. And then we'll go back and pick up our minutes from the last meeting and get those approved. And as far as I know, that will conclude the business we need to conduct for the committee today. Is that correct? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All
Our
right.
study session next Tuesday will also be Zoom. Brenda, we would start that at 5:30.
Yes, sir.
So next Tuesday, 5:30, we'll send you all the Zoom invite for your participation and or observance. And on that night, the final I's being dotted and T's being crossed before the agenda is created for formal adoption of the plan by council on August 25th.
Okay. All right. Do we have a member of our EDAP committee that would like to make the motion to generally accept the revisions from council noting the advocacy issue?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ed, second by Chris. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Or
Aye.
wave, whatever. Any opposed, please say nay. Okay, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And then I think we'd been sent the minutes at our last committee meeting, and after reading those, I believe they were accurate reflection of our meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes as they were presented?
So moved.
Motion by Chris,
Second.
Second by Ed. Thank you. Any other questions or comments related to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye or wave. Motion.
Aye.
Okay, aye. And any opposed? Hearing none, those minutes are accepted by our committee. Daryl or Brenda, any other elements that we ought to cover? Or Catherine, do you have any thoughts that we should consider before we wrap up?
None for me.
Okay. I think it's very important for our committee to understand and realize that, based on what Catherine said earlier, that the $9 million allocation to the city could, Catherine, could you just say that again? Just so,
Sure.
I don't know if Chris was on, I'd like to have the words in my mouth so I could repeat that if I need to.
Sure. So with the economic development bond proposition, council added language to say that if federal funding is awarded to the city for the same or similar purposes, then that funding offsets the authorization for the bonds. And so we talked about whether or not that meant that we should tell people to vote no on the bonds on this question. And I think, until we have that money in hand, because the rules do keep changing from the Treasury Department, we've seen that over and over, that we continue to encourage, a vote yes on this proposition, knowing that we won't issue those bonds if we get this federal funding.
Any questions from any of the committee members about that? I mean, it's likely we'll get asked, well, city gets $9 million. Why are we still doing this? I think it's important for that we're going to be able to be articulate. So Catherine, I really appreciate that. I wonder if it would be, Brenda, something that you could email that language to each of us, so the members of the committee, so we'd have it at our fingertips. And I do think that could end up being a point of discussion in the community. I think we ought to be ready to be able to know that language is in the bond, that it specifically says that the bonds will not be sold, the funding will not occur if the city gets this funding, the other funding. Okay. Any other business that any committee members would like to bring before the committee? Hearing none, I think, Daryl, anything else that we need to
I
think
think
about?
we're good. I appreciate all the hard work that the board's put into this, and we're able to kind of spring into action, short notice, come up with a document of value, and definitely not a wasted step, whether it's local bond money or CARES Act money. These program parameters will help our small businesses through this current pandemic, and hopefully put us in a position where we're well prepared to spring into action for the next big emergency that comes to Norman. Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you. And special thanks to city staff. I know you all are really working hard. Brenda, I agree with Derry, you need a raise. So, and Catherine's great, Sarah. So we'll stand adjourned. Thank you all very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I will send you an invite for Tuesday study session so you guys can jump on.
Correct.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.